one of the federal judges blocking one of President Trump's initiative in her brief cited a Broadway musical. Find out which musical and what the judge is talking about. Also, one of the prominent cities of pride parades is having trouble finding sponsors. Oh, that is such a shame. We'll talk about that. And also, Colombia finally bent the knee to the president after threatening to withhold a bunch of money from the institution. All that and more coming up on this episode of Turning Point Tonight. My name is Joe Bob. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Turning Point Tonight. Now, remember, you can email the show anytime you want, tpt@tpusa.com. You can email the show whether you agree or whether you're wrong. Whatever you think, email the show, tpt@tpusa.com. We love to read those emails in our fourth segment. If it's abhorrent and awful and terrible, chances are we'll actually read it on the show. So tpt@tpusa.com. But before we get to any of those crazy stories, how about this crazy story? Now, I like to think of part of my job is to watch some of the lib shows that you don't want to watch for you, so I can relay what the libs are saying to you. And part of that is watching shows like 60 Minutes, which has been god-awful over the last, several years, but really, really terrible in the last several months, except for Sunday. Now, they did a bunch of stories. I'm not talking about all of those stories. What I am talking about specifically is the Canadian border. 60 Minutes, not Fox News, not a right-wing conservative news media outlet, did a big feature on the Canadian border and whether or not cartels are smuggling fentanyl and human beings into the United States from Canada. Now, this all hinges on the premise that President Trump is issuing tariffs on Canada, in order to, stop the flood of illegals and fentanyl into the country. Now, a bunch of the libs are saying, well, that's not happening. Oh, no, this is not warranted. This doesn't need to happen. Well, turns out 60 Minutes in their reporting said, well, yes, it is. Not only that, cartel members are advertising, get this, on TikTok, saying, hey, you can come to the United States. Here, pay this fee. We'll get you into the United States, but get you through Canada. On top of that, 60 Minutes also outlined that fentanyl is a big problem coming through Canada. And at the end of the day, ultimately, this feels like something that we should all agree on. Got a pretty long clip to play you from this Canadian 60 Minutes piece. But before we do that, I want to bring in our panel for today. With us today is Hannah Faulkner, host of the Hannah Faulkner Show, and Mason Musso, musician, among many other talented things. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for what you're doing. I mean, Joe Bob, I just got to say this real quick. I listened to you a couple years ago when I was 15 years old, and you are quite literally one of the most hilarious comedians that you could find anywhere.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Mason, your turn to give me praise.
Thanks for having me on, Joe Bob. I appreciate it.
Guys, this is a wild story, and I also feel like this is like not really a partisan thing, right? This is everybody wants the border to be secure and doesn't want Americans dying of fentanyl. Having said that, here is a clip from the 60 Minutes piece that I want to play for you, and then we'll get your guys' thoughts on this conservatives being proven right. Watch this.
Of men who just crossed the border ran to an SUV that drove them deeper into New York. You'll also see a woman getting out of the car and go north to Canada. This man told us he coordinated the handoff and took the video.
Can you tell us who you work for?
For the Sinaloa cartel.
He goes by the name Javi and agreed to speak with us only with his camera off. He said he can't risk his identity being exposed.
How does this work? They tell you where to go? They tell you how many people you have to bring across each week?
Exactly. That's how it goes. They provide the people. They have more people who are behind all this, looking for customers, finding them, and summoning them to certain locations.
We found Javi through his online ads, which he says TikTok recently took down. In a conversation with our producer, he did briefly turn his camera on and allowed us to record his masked face. While it's not possible to verify everything Javi told us, he sent these pictures of what he says are his guns as proof of his ties to the Sinaloa cartel. A source in Canadian intelligence told us Javi's story is consistent with the cartel's human and drug smuggling operation.
Jeez, yeah, wild, and we don't want to make too much light of this, but it's fascinating. Hannah, I want to start with you. So during COVID, if you even thought that, oh, maybe the Chinese bat fever came out of a lab, you immediately got taken off of the internet, social media as a whole. But now here the cartels are able to advertise on TikTok until 60 Minutes uncovers it. Holy cow, what kind of situation do we find ourselves in here with this one?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, both of you guys know, truth will always prevail in the end. I mean, George Washington said sometimes it takes a little pain to bring truth to light, and this is the stuff that we've been talking about for decades upon decades as the conservative movement, as the party of truth, as the party of common sense, and those that are acknowledging reality. I mean, it's crazy the things that we're even fighting for, and even having to talk about, I mean, the fact that thousands upon thousands of pounds of fentanyl has been coming across not just our southern border, but also our northern border, which many far right, even entertainment and television shows have been refusing to talk about until just recently. So this is a crisis. Finally, the left is admitting it. And we saw that really too with the gender quote unquote affirming care, which is not gender affirming care. Because if they were affirming it, they'd just tell you you're born a man, you always be a man, and vice versa. But we're starting to see all of these news networks come out and say that yes, these hospitals are in fact performing these chemical castrations and surgeries on minors, when what they've told us for a very long time is that this is not happening. So yet again, the left finally admitting their own failures in the truth.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Mason, again, like, not to drag, people into this like hyper politicized conversation, but at the same time, like, this shouldn't really be that partisan, right? Like, I think we can all agree, like, hey, you got to have borders. Even Bernie Sanders agrees we have to have borders. And two, we don't want Americans dying from fentanyl. Is that too difficult of a concept to try and convey?
No, and I totally agree with Hannah. I think a lot of people are waking up too. I mean, obviously not all, but if you don't come to this country legally, you're out. Like, it's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty simple. Yeah, I agree with Hannah. I'm not sure why this country even has this debate, So, and
yeah.
the fentanyl is a big problem. I live over here in LA, and it's absolutely devastating.
Yeah, it is wild to see kind of how the media distorts what is going on in in front of everybody's eyes. We all know what's happening, and finally 60 Minutes, not a conservative media outlet, decides to cover it. Speaking of things that the media does not like covering, the media loved covering a couple weeks ago when President Trump said, hey, Columbia University, all of that money that the federal government gives you, that's going away unless you make some big changes. Columbia has bent the knee to the Trump administration and said, hey, here's all the things that we're going to do to ensure that we get that money. Now, Mason, I'm really curious about your thoughts on this, because I live in California. You live in California in the arts world. A lot of people in the art community are lefties, but they're sane lefties in a lot of ways. Do you think that this capitulation to the president is the university presidents, Columbia, but also many universities around the country kind of, again, deciding we need to enforce the rules? Do you think the university presidents were overtaken with their crazy protesting, Hamas-loving people, and are finally looking for an out, and are finally like, oh, this is great. We're covered here to be able to call the lefties call the protesters what they are? Or do you think the presidents of these universities agreed with the students? Does that question make sense? Like, it kind of feels like sane lefties are getting some cover now to be sane effectively.
Yeah, I think they are looking for an out. I think, kind of what you were saying, the arts are very left leaning. I think that's changing. I think a lot of more right kind of like leaning artists are coming out, or maybe they just see how far left the left has gone. They're like, okay, we need to pull back a little bit. So I think you're right. I think these professors saw a way out. Obviously, you just can't be, supporting terrorists and stuff. I mean, it's pretty, again, another very cut and simple, like, it's just not going to fly,
Yeah, supporting terrorists, bad. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you for that wonderfully obvious insight. Hannah, you're obviously much closer to this college age and college world. How much do stories kind of like this and seeing what's going on in college campus impact your day-to-day life and probably the very near future for you?
Yeah, man, I remember just traveling to a lot of these college campuses across the country, even heading into the 2024 election and talking to these college students. I mean, these are literal indoctrination camps, if I've ever seen an indoctrination camp, from elementary school, some 5, 6 years old to 24, 25 years old. These young people, these students are being indoctrinated with all of these leftist ideologies. And the thing that is the irony of the whole situation are these, Palestine, pro-Palestine, pro-terrorist protests that they're having on these college campuses. Is they have these signs stating queers for Palestine or feminists for Palestine, which is an oxymoron if I've ever seen an oxymoron. I've been down to the West Bank. I've seen what the Gaza Strip looks like. These women are oppressed. There is no such thing as a feminist in the Gaza Strip. There is no such thing as a gay person, because I can assure you right now that if you claim to be a homosexual or a gay individual in the West Bank, they will kill you. That is what they say in their Quran, and that's what they stand on. And if you want to be a woman with all of this woman power, you're not going to be free, and it's not going to fly in front of these Islamic terrorists. It's common sense, like Mason just said. We should be calling them out for what they are, and it's insanity to see these judges, these college faculty members, all of these people across the country push back against common sense moral standards in our society. But this is what happens when you reject God, when you reject morality. You're going to see consequences like this, including an entire generation that is just brainwashed.
Laying down the hammer. Bring it, Hannah. Love it. Speaking of the LGBT community, our panel will be back right after the break to talk about one of the biggest pride festivals in the world having some issues with some sponsors. Don't go away. We'll be right back, and also talking to Monica Page, Turning Point's White House correspondent. We'll be right back after this. See you then.